I don't know how to start saying. What should I say?
I just kind of want to get it started. I'm pretty disappointed with how I did my experiment. I'm not that dumb.
You don't actually have to do that. I came in today very prepared.
To be honest, I don't think that was the right order after kind of calibrating that.
Trying to figure out how to phrase it. I was trying to be as sustainable as possible, but when that incident happened, I had no choice.
It's not good.
What do you think happens when we bring two life sciences students into a lab and ask them to do the exact same experiment, but the way they work is totally different? We're not going to tell them that. We're going to give them a challenge today to do 2 PCR reactions with the exact same reagents, but the idea is to measure the sustainability impact they created at the end of the experiment. Let's see how it goes.
Hi, I'm a student at the MBLS Institute at the University of Glasgow, and I've come in today to this practical. Been kind of super busy, so I rushed into everything. To be honest, I'm kind of just here to take on my practical and see how it goes.
I'm an MCB student, and I came in today very prepared. I read the lab book before coming into the lab, and when I came into the lab, I read it again along the steps to make sure that I know what I'm doing.
So when I came into the lab, I was feeling kind of flustered, took 2 pairs of gloves, and probably at the time didn't realize it. I'm sure overall I probably could use less. And then when I went to set up my experiment, everything kind of was all over the place. I briefly brushed over the lab manual. I didn't really take anything in. I just want to get it started and get the process flowing.
Because I already had an idea of what the experiment was. When I got to my bench, I was looking at the reagents. I read through the steps again to make sure that I know what I have to do next. I prepared my reagents. I took a pair of gloves and made sure I had my goggles next to me before starting. Once I knew what I wanted to do and had all my reagents ready, I put on my gloves and my goggles, and then I started to work. You want to read the lab manual every step of the way, and it's actually really useful to tick through the steps that you're doing to make sure you don't miss something and that you don't make mistakes, but also think through the experiment that you're doing. Reading the manual was really helpful before and during class, so I can map out the workflow that I needed to do.
I briefly flicked over it. Probably should have read through it thoroughly and kind of checked off my steps as I went and kind of got a full overview before I began the experiment, instead of just kind of making brash decisions and rushing into it and overusing certain substances I didn't need to use necessarily.
I first looked at the manual and I looked at what reagents go into the PCR, including master mix, forward, reverse primer, and then DNA. And I wanted to be efficient, so I thought I should put the general reagents in first. I started with water and then put the water in every single tube using one tip. Then once the water was in, I added the master mix, and I was very careful every time I put in the master mix not to touch the water with the tip of my pipette, so that I could use the same tip in every single tube. Once that was done, I used one tip for the reverse primer and one tip for the forward primer. Once each tube had all the common reagents inside it, then I could add the DNA and use a tip for every single DNA sample separately.
So I started with the DNA, and then I moved on to the master mix, and then I did the forward primer and the reverse primer. And to be honest, I don't think that was the right order after kind of calibrating that and kind of reading over the lab manual after the experiment, which probably should have done before. But I should have definitely read over the lab manual first and taken everything a bit more slowly. And although it takes time, it's more beneficial to the environment and to us as students. Concerning the moving of certain liquids, I should have probably used the smaller pipette tips instead of using the larger ones, because that's wasteful. I used too many gloves during the experiment and didn't really think it through. I just don't think I kind of read it. I mean, like, a PCR is PCR, I suppose. It kind of just didn't matter what order I put it in. Like, you know, it's all going to end up in the same tube anyway. No, I should have thought about it more methodically and kind of figured out what I should be using and the process and kind of the theory behind it a bit more, maybe done some research prior. I think Paula did a really good job of setting up. Concerning the biological safety of the entire experiment, I thought that I was going to be contaminating everything. I'm quite clumsy. I put pits in my lab coat and I was like, I'm going to have to dispose of that. And I was just not attentive towards how many I was using. And I was worried about contamination overall. So that's really maybe why I use so many pipette tips.
You don't actually have to do that. If you put the common reagents first, you don't have to worry about different samples contaminating each other. So when you have that common reagents first, and then you add the DNA separately, you won't mix the DNA from different samples together. While I was working, one of my tips fell out of my pipette on the bench, actually in the ice. Once that happened, I couldn't reuse that tip because that would include external examination into my sample. So I had to bin it. I was trying to be as sustainable as possible, but when that incident happened, I had no choice. I had to bin the tip. So it's normal to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes in the lab, but as long as we're trying to be better and economical as possible, that is what we're trying to achieve. I only used one pair of gloves because I didn't get my gloves dirty, so I knew I could take them off and put them back on again.
I used two because I realized at the beginning of the experiment I was meant to put something to the side and I'd already taken my gloves off, so I didn't really have any choice but to bin them.
I think I used about 8 or 9 pipette tips. That's pretty much what I was expecting.
I feel like maybe like 10 or 11, give or take a few. Oh, okay, that's not good. I feel like it's really important to understand how much waste that we've generated. If I wasted 50 tips and say Paula did the same experiment as me and like the way I did it, that's another 50 tips, so that's 100 tips within just 10 minutes. And then if say, for example, you had like multiple classes and multiple years, if everyone used 50 tips each, then you generate so much waste. Being conscious of that, especially in the lab environment, is really important for our global environment.
I'm really happy with how my experiment went. I got prepared before starting and I tried to use as few pipette tips as possible. And I think that really helped reduce the waste that came out of the lab.
I'm pretty disappointed with how I did my experiment. I feel like I probably could have done it a bit more efficiently and a bit more economically. Then now I understand what I could have done differently and how I could have adapted that and adjusted it to make the experiment more efficient. I think now I realize how changing the way I do things will have a massive impact overall on our community and on the uni itself and global sustainability.